Lorenzo is a colleague of mine. We both met in LA. And Lorenzo, I believe, you know how we all have gifts. Lorenzo has a lot of gifts, and one of those is his brain runs a mile a minute. And he is always thinking like 20 steps ahead. And I get very stimulated when I hear Lorenzo. He brings things that will challenge us, make us, you'll probably end up with a lot of questions, and I think that's a really good thing. And I'm just really proud that Lorenzo is here with us.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm actually going to unmute myself here, and hopefully there won't be an echo. So the recording.
His sound. Disconnect the sound.
Hello. There we go.
You did? Oh, okay. Oh, thank you.
That's what we did.
Gracias.
There we go. All right. It is my pleasure to be with you all today. Well, look, we're trying to make it more like Puerto Rico. We're adding fans. So that it feels more like home. So no, thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. As I mentioned earlier, I am the Executive Director of TriTech, the Experimental Laboratory for Church Innovation. And I'm also the Chief Innovation Officer for Virginia Theological Seminary and General Theological Seminary. And in those roles, I'm a trained futurist. And what that means is that I've been trained by the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, California, to look ahead so we can have foresight rather than hindsight. I mean, all of you probably agree that to some extent or another, the church always seems to be catching up. We're like, oh, we should get online when people were like online 20 years ago. And we have the processes of innovation that usually ends up that we're coming up with a MySpace page in 2023, right? Because that's how we are as a church. So we were thinking like there gotta be a better way for us to be able to do this work of innovation. So before we get to what I'm talking to you about today, which is in Spanish, but I'll say it in English, the future of the Latino church, is I wanted to take a moment and make all of you futurists with me. I want to teach you, I'm going to take just a few minutes of my presentation to teach you how to look ahead at the future as well. Because it might be in your own context that you need to be able to see how the world is changing around us, not just the way that I do it professionally for a denomination. So what I want to do is teach you how to cómo ver la iglesia del futuro, how to see the church of the future. There's one first rule of futurist work. Never, ever predict the future. What we seek here is not certainty, but clarity. And there's a difference. If ever anybody comes up to you and says, I am certain that this and this and this is going to happen, walk away. What you want is clarity of like, what is the future likely to happen? If this is happening now, and this is happening now, and this is happening, what happens if we just keep going down that line? What's likely to happen here? And this is what we call a scenario of the future. So that's what we do. We look at what's happening of the future today so that we can look forward and see what's happening in the future. So when you're dealing with, cuando se trata del futuro, es mucho más importante ser imaginativo que estar en lo cierto. When you're thinking about the future, it is indeed much better to be imaginative than it is to be right. Because it is also how you can discover opportunities. So the first question we need to look at when we're talking about the future is, what is the future? I'm just curious, what do you all think? What is the future? Tomorrow is the future, indeed.
The next second.
The next second is the future. You're all very much studied philosophy, I can see. What we like to do is, when we think about the future, is when something will be vastly different than it is today. So when we think of the future, for most futurists, what we're actually looking at are 10 years from now.
Generations.
Not even generations, because generations makes it so far ahead that you're like, I'll let them take care of it. And we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about how we have two generations that are coming in that have absolutely no connection to the church, and that what problem that's going to present for us. But when we're looking at 10 years, when we look at the future, we look at 10 years, and here's why. Because 10 years is enough time for a lot of things to happen and for the world to change drastically. What do I mean by that? It took 10 years between when the first iPhone was released, iPhone number 1, to where the majority of the world's population owned a smartphone. 10 years between those two things. It took 10 years between user number 1 on Facebook to them having 1 billion users on Facebook. And yes, user number 1 is Mr. Zuckerberg, by the way, because you're wondering. Good conversation there. It took 10 years between the first protests in the civil rights movement until we had the laws passed in the 60s protecting civil rights for African Americans in this country. 10 years for that to happen. But then you can also imagine how quickly can things happen. It took 10 years between the first country legalizing same-sex marriage before a majority of the people in the majority of countries say that same-sex marriage, and by the way, it is legal in 36 of those countries. That's 10 years. Before those 10 years, people would have said, you're crazy. There's no way that can happen. We're likely to see some advancements in how that speed happens. ChatGPT will talk about that. But so 10 years is enough time for us to say, that's far enough where I can still do something about it, but close enough that it's not my child's problem to deal with. 10 years so we can actually do something about it. So that's why we look at 10 years. So in your training now as futurists, when somebody asks you, when does the future start? The answer is
10 years.
Exactly, 10 years from now. So we must ask ourselves a question as we're looking at this future world. What is the one thing that cannot be different in the future? I'm not talking theology here. I just realized I am talking to a group of theologians and we can go deep on that one. No, but outside of theology, right? What are things that are definitely not going to change in the next 10 years?
People are going to continue to live.
Well, I hope
born and
people are.
die.
That is, I could change your mind on some of those. But for example, it used to be that we would always say, well, it takes a man and a woman to make a baby. But scientists now have actually, and what you're seeing there on the screen is a picture of a baby born of 2 mothers. There was no dad involved in this little, and so if they're able to do it, still a mammal, like you or I, but it doesn't necessarily. So can we, if that's a dot of the future, and they're going to continue these experiments and is it easy for us to extrapolate as we go this one and say like, yeah, I could see a future where it doesn't take a mom and a dad, a male and a female, to make a baby. This is not a theology question, so nobody's. we do have the conflict person, so but let's not go there. It's a big book we'd have to go through. We don't have that much time. But here's another one that perhaps you might be thinking like, we're always going to need oxygen to breathe. Well, right now there are scientists working in order for us to make our trip to Mars. We're going to have to change how we humans breathe. And there are scientists right now changing the genetics of humans so that we require much less air as we're breathing. Even almost getting us to the point that we could reach a point that we're breathing from water. Right? So we're thinking, if I had told you just a moment ago, oh, one of the things that's likely not to change is that we all breathe, right? You'll be like, yeah, I'm going to need to breathe. You're going to need to breathe. We're all going to need to breathe. I've just shown you that in the future, things can be vastly different than how they are now. And all this to tell us, in the future, everything can be different. Even things that today we would consider just impossible to imagine. This should scare us a little bit also, by the way, because it means we need to be good stewards of this future and why our work is important. So to boil it down, there is nothing that cannot be different in the future. Nothing. But that's also an opportunity if you think about it. Because we look at our empty buildings now, right? In the mainland denominations, as the numbers continue to go down, we're like, oh my God, we're never going to get the youth back. We're never, it's like, it wouldn't go so far. Because there is nothing that can't be different in the future. Great. So now you understand it's 10 years and everything is up for grabs, right? Good futurists. You guys are going to make amazing futurists. I love this quote, and it's in English. There you go, Kevin. Any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. This is actually outside of the offices of the Institute for the Future. And I just love that quote. That at first it should look like, again, if I had come to you and said, we're not going to need to breathe forever, you go, that's just ridiculous, right? But now we know that it's possible. So what does it take for us to look at the future? Well, the first thing we do when we're starting to look for clues about the future is we need to find drivers of change. And that's a big word to sort of say like trends. That's another word for it. But drivers of change are different than just trends. And I like to use sort of some examples for this. So for example, there's perhaps an area where scientific discovery is accelerating. You want to know an area where scientific discovery is accelerating right now? Alzheimer's disease. And we're about to see some leaps and jumps in Alzheimer's disease. And I could see a future where it is either stopped in its tracks or even reversed, right? That's no longer like, oh my God, that'll never change, right? It could be also a change in people's behaviors. If all of a sudden people think back to before Starbucks, I think all of us are old enough to remember before Starbucks was on every corner, as you just went across the street. Everybody didn't have coffee from a local little shop called Starbucks, 20 years ago. That wasn't a human behavior that we sought out. So much so that in some cities, Starbucks literally will put a Starbucks across the street from the other because we're willing to stop at Starbucks, but we're not willing to change our behavior so much as across the street to get it, right? But that was a change in behavior brought about that we're like, I need daily coffee in that way. I still remember Nescafe. Right, you grab your Nescafe, you put in the thing, and there you go, right? Hollywood, I don't do coffee anymore. Another change, the third one here, which is about to change our worlds drastically, is technology and new technology entering the space. ChatGPT will change everything. The same way that computers changed everything, ChatGPT will change everything.
I have it in my phone already.
I have it on my phone. I pay the subscription for it. I have 4.0 even. But we need to remind ourselves, by the way, that ChatGPT is just a tool. Anyone not know it? Don't be embarrassed. ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence that you type into it a question or a command. You can say to ChatGPT, I want you to give me a Christmas sermon, and it will write you a Christmas sermon. And you can say, now I wanted you to give it to me in Shakespearean language, and it will in 2 seconds translate it into Shakespearean language. Now you can say to it, I want it in Spanish. It will translate it to Spanish in 3 seconds.
It's Google with asteroids.
It is a thinking machine, right? It is this thing that is just going to continue to learn and learn and learn and learn. The impact of this is something that we can't even imagine yet, only because I don't think we're that creative yet to think about it. So that's a way, that's now all of a sudden, that's going to be a driver of change for us. A social movement, right? Black Lives Matter was a social movement that started to change how we see the world. Young people and income inequality, Bernie Sanders. We need to talk a little bit more about Generation Z and Alpha in a moment, but those movements, right? So a political idea that's becoming more and more popular. You probably have heard about universal income. That's becoming more and more popular. The likelihood that we will have universal income is now more real than it certainly was 5 years ago. And within 10 years, it is very likely that this country will be offering a universal income for everyone. Right? This is what's happening. That's a political change that's becoming more and more popular by time goes by. There could be a threat that scientists keep telling us is coming. And that unless we do something, something bad's going to happen. Climate change will have drastic impacts. And we're going to talk about migration. We're going to have climate migration be more and more of an issue. France, for example, now offers climate migration visas for refugees. That's going to continue to happen because the disproportionate number of countries that are affected, of course, are poorer countries. So this is part of the reason why we probably don't care as much. A large demographic change, right? So we have the baby boomers, large generation, hence the boom in their name. Generation X, my generation, we kind of little. Yay, Generation X. Right? We're kind of a small generation. We're only not the smallest because there's still the silent generation is still the smallest because they keep dying out. But we're the second smallest. Then the millennials, huge generation that's coming. Stand for your peeps, stand for your peeps. Then comes Generation Z. And now we have, by the way, Generation Alpha, which comes after Z. They're 9-10 years old now. So when we as a church keeps talking about the youngins, those millennials, it's like, oh my God, they have grandkids. Don't be talking about them as being young. You know?
Yes.
You know, so those demographic changes, and what's going to happen, I'll tell you this quote from a book that I just recently read on Generation Z. Generation Z will change America more than having been born in America will have changed Generation Z. Let me say it again. Generation Z will change America more than Generation Z having been born in America will have changed them. They are not afraid to ask for what they want. We saw that in Florida, after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, they got on a bus and went around the country to talk about gun control. And they were the first one just got elected to Congress from Florida, right? Florida just messes me up. I don't understand whether they're this or that.
The thing happens to me with California.
Right?
Either weather.
So, yeah, probably. The existential threats. No, so we're about to see such changes as Generation Z comes to power and they start demanding things. My generation, Generation X, we would talk about like, oh, you know, civil rights. We should probably like go to brunch and talk about it. Generation Z is like, what are you talking about? Go to brunch. We need to go to the streets and protest for this. It's not going to happen by itself. The changes that they're going to demand, including of the church, are going to be drastic. A large regulatory long-term investment in something could also be a driver of change. So, for example, the fact that we're investing so much money into some like the Mars project, and there's a couple of other regulatory changes that are long-term that will certainly be a driver of change. And so if there's another cultural shift, so cultural shifts can also be these drivers of change. But let me give you an image that I think explains it. Think of a big wave. That's a driver of change. In other words, if you happen to be swimming in the ocean and there's a wave, it's going to move you, whether you want to or not, right? So the best example of this is the internet. The internet was a wave. When it came in the mid-90s, people were like, oh, what's this thing? Anybody remember dialing up on AOL? You got mail, right? And you wait and wait. And no matter what, that's right. Your mom would pick up the phone and it's like, oh, darn. You millennials don't understand this, but it happened. But that was a wave, right? Imagine when you were a travel agent and you're like, oh my God, what do I have to do with the internet? I sell plane tickets for someone to travel from here to Puerto Rico. What does that have to do with me, right? The internet came and there was a wave that changed just about every industry, right? Including crime. Crime was changed by the internet. There's no denying it. It created all new levels of crime, all sorts of things. So that's a driver change. Think of the driver change as a wave that's coming. Then, as we look ahead, every one of these areas, actually, I can't do it. Every creative field has its raw material, right? Every creative field. So if you're a potter, you need the clay. If you're into computers, you need to know what to do with code. If you are a chef, you need the ingredients. If you're a musician, you need many little notes to make it happen. And of course, if you make clothes, you need to have your fabrics. In our field, as futurists that I'm making you now, In our field, what we look for are what are called signals of change. Signals of change is a concrete example of the future here today. Think back to before March 2020. How many congregations were like on Facebook Live or something like that, right? It was like a tiny number of congregations. And we were all like, woo, look at that person, they're on Facebook Live, right? It was a small number. It wasn't, then all of a sudden. But when that first church somewhere in America, and there must have been one, that went on Facebook Live and said, we're going to broadcast our services. You could have looked at that if you happened to be in that community, if you found out about it and said, what would happen if that went mainstream? What would happen if everybody was broadcasting their services on Facebook? What would that mean for the reach of your congregation beyond just your geographic borders? What would that mean for the reach of your message? What would that mean for what we try to do? So it is something real that is already happening, right? So, and it is for us a clue that soon things could change. So going back to our example here of the wave, I look at the wave and look at the little surfer. Now, if that wave is the internet for us, back in 1995, someone could have looked at the internet and found this little website called Amazon.com. And you might have said, like, well, that's interesting. I now can buy books instead of having to go to, what was the other competitor to Barnes and Noble? There was
Borders.
Yeah, right. And the one that was at the airport all the time?
Books and books.
Books and Books was another one.
Books a million.
Books a Million, right? There were all these others. And you're like, oh, I can buy books now on Amazon. That's interesting. I wonder if at some point, right, if when you first saw that, imagine if you had asked, I wonder what else I'll be able to buy online. I wonder if I'll be able to buy medicines, cars. Who would have thought cars online, right? Who would have thought the ability for you to choose any radio station, any radio program, any time of the day through a podcast in your car? Sorry, I know you own 3 radio stations, but yeah, right. The ability for us to do that. The key is to say, if Amazon goes big, if this little thing where they're selling books, if we start selling dog food, if remember pets.com and all those, right? If we start selling everything online, what could happen if it goes mainstream? What happens if this catches on? So this is what we're talking about, for example, when it comes to chat GPT, generative AI technology. Right now, we're in the early stages, and we're using it like, oh, Bing has it now. They're just trying to be, a bigger search engine. And it's like, oh, I can ask Bing and it responds to me like a human would respond to me. Or I can go in ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, please write me a letter of thank you to the LCNN for having had me be present with them, and that I look forward to working with them in the future, and make it be 500 words. And it comes out in 3 seconds, I sign it and send it off. Right? That's now. Right? So what happens, and not what happens, by the way, if it goes on, what happens when generative AI becomes part of everything? I could give you an example, for the church. I could easily see pastoral care being done by this. We could create a chatbot that looks at all of scripture and all of theology ever written and answers questions based upon how the person's asking the question. ChatGPT, the generative AI technology, also, by the way, I know this because we did this study, literally had 25-year-olds record themselves a daily theological journal. But I didn't just get the recording of a minute or two. I also got the computer analysis of it that was telling me what percentage of their facial features expressed fear, how much of their comments were based on joy, how their voice sounded, whether they were depressed or not. Right? So
4 actualizaciones en los últimos 4 meses que salió. La plataforma que más se ha actualizado en menor cantidad de tiempo y ha logrado mayor desarrollo, 4 meses.
they got 100 million users in 4 months. Remember how it took Facebook 10 years to get to 1 billion? They're going to get there much faster. And forget about just people using it. What's it going to mean when your house becomes a truly smart house?
Oh.
right? That you can actually ask it questions and it will think them through and give you. The problem, of course, lies with misinformation and so many things. But what I want you to see here is find signals. So you can look at your neighborhood and be like, huh, an artist just moved into the bad, what we would consider the bad part of town. What does that mean? Well, I've been enough around the block enough to know that that usually is the first sign of gentrification, right? So can that be happening here? Or they're investing in biotech. Well, what happens if that one little company set up shop doing biotech? That's how what happened in Boston. And then all of a sudden others came in around it. What happens if we become a biotech center? Right, so you can look at your neighborhood and start to see signals of the future that are already here today. Because, as this quote says, el futuro ya está aquí, simplemente no está distribuido uniformemente. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And so that's why we look for these signals within these drivers of change. So the first key is to identify the drivers. What are the big things that are happening in your community, that are happening in your church, in your denomination, that are changing? It's like, this is going to have an impact on us, right? All of a sudden, they're going to build a highway. All of a sudden, these are drivers that the community is changing. Basic income is changing. Does that mean we can afford now to do ministry directly to the poor? All these things changing. And then you just have to find, oh my God, that person's already doing it. And then what happens if that takes off? Driver of change, signal change, the wave that's going to move you, and the individual that's going to move you. So now that I've taught you how you yourselves remember, all you have to remember is the future is how many years?
10 years.
And the wave is called a driver of change. And the small little signals are called signal of change. Exactly. The little, so just keep looking for signals. They're everywhere. I read 5 newspapers a day. Well, I lie. I skim 5 newspapers a day looking for signals of change. Because generally for us, we can see them in business. It's like, oh, if that's working in business, what would happen if that actually were to catch on in the church? What would that mean if all of a sudden a collection plate goes by and someone can just tap their credit card? That was one of the experiments we did at Tri Tank. It works, by the way. So what I want to do now is I want to go through what I think are 5 different scenarios. So these are 5 different scenarios of a possible future for the Latino church in the United States. Remember, what we are seeking here is clarity, not certainty. I am not predicting that this is what will happen. I'm just saying if these dots continue, this is the likely outcome of what's going to happen.
So Lorenzo, as you begin to show us the 5 señales estas, it's okay to be afraid. When
You should be.
The computer, the car, the phone, being smart, everything sounds fantastic. When it comes to my life, to the church, like a mí me formaron de otra manera.
See?
So coming to this reality, it's okay to be afraid.
Absolutely. We should all approach it with trepidation also. The church, somebody once told me, oh my God, the job you do is kind of like Silicon Valley. You go and break things and create new things. I'm like, not so much. We carry with us a 2,000-year-old tradition. We can't just throw that out the window. I'm not saying we need to take 500 years, to say to Copernicus, I'm sorry. You're kind of right about that, right? And I'm not big, we are really slow, right? But we need to be faster in movement and be willing to say, what's at our core? What's really important to us? And then these other things that are around the core, do they matter as much if we do them differently? That's how we need to approach it, right? So, and just keeping in mind that the Holy Spirit is with us in this work as well. When we are being creators, when we are being creative, that is the Holy Spirit being active in our lives. So, para asustarte más, let me go ahead and give you some 5 scenarios of the future and what that might look like. The first scenario es el surgimiento de un movimiento de las iglesias cristianas latinas. We will see a significant number of purely Latino mega churches in this country, I think. I think that this is coming. I think that this is going to happen here for a couple of reasons. One, the Latino community continues to grow in the United States. and that will not abate, that will continue to grow. They will find their way to a church. We've already seen the number of Pentecostal movements continue to grow, and evangelical movements continue to grow, which tend toward the larger megachurch movements. There also will be an increased amount of influence from these churches. And we'll talk about politics in a second, because I could see in the not too distant future, as in other Latin American countries, that we could see this, that the rise of charismatic and prosperity gospel being preached at these congregations. There is a large number of people who this attracts. And we know that, particularly as the numbers you showed us earlier, we know that while Latinos work more, right, and that they make less, and to people that make less money, the prosperity gospel always seems more attractive. So as we look at that, we can easily see that there will be this surge of Latino mega churches in this country with a lot of influence. The same way that we saw from like Saddleback and some of the other churches in the English church.
Lorenzo, may I interrupt you?
Please.
How do you want us to handle questions? You want to keep questions for the end at some point, or?
How do you all want to, do you want to go questions as we go through these 5 scenarios, or do you want to keep them for the end in case I answer them?
And.
Okay. Okay. Because then you wanted me to give you some minutes back, otherwise I would just take them all. Related to this, but you're gonna be like, wow, Lorenzo, you're now contradicting yourself, but it is not. We will also see a surgence of micro Latino churches. The micro movement will also come to the Latino church. The reason why I put this picture at the beginning, and by the way, this picture, I went to Midjourney yesterday, and I said, I want you to give me a realistic looking picture. This was created by AI yesterday afternoon. I want you to give me a realistic looking picture of what a catacomb looked like in Rome at the time of the apostles.
Wow.
And this is what it came up with. And the reason why this is here, I wanted to show you this, not just to show you the power of the technology. And this was free, by the way, online. Be careful of any picture you see. I saw pictures on the internet yesterday, all over the place, of Mr. Trump being, with handcuffs being locked down, that of course did not happen. So just question everything. Question everything you see. But why I say this is because micro churches are going to grow. When we see these younger generations coming, what we will see, by the way, from so as I mentioned earlier, so the baby boomers brought up their kids, and so Generation X we're like, yay, church, and then we're like, church-ish, we'll kind of go, Easter and Christmas are great, and maybe there's a wedding, and I don't hate church, but it's just not like, brunch is nice. Which is why during the pandemic, we saw a drop, and why 30% of those people are not coming back to mainline denominations. They're like, Sunday brunch is actually kind of cool, right? And I form community with people, and I have bread and wine, it's great. So, and I don't have a priest. So what we are seeing though is that when they had kids, and the latter part of the baby boomers, they made a choice and they said, you know what, we're not going to baptize our kids. We're going to let them choose when they're older. Mm-hmm. And this is not so much so in the Latino community, but in the Anglo community. But who are these younger kids growing up with? Right? And so while the Latinos are culturally Christian, because they were baptized with that, the others are totally not. And the number of nuns dropped for 2 years in a row. Nuns, not with the habit, but NONES, that have no religious preference when they select. But the number of Christians didn't go up. The numbers that went up were for paganism, witchcraft, and New Age. Right? So they're choosing, but they're not choosing Christianity. Not quite where I'm going with this. I think you're drawing a different conclusion. But actually, to your point, that is a signal, right? When they started choosing paganism, and when little Jewish girls started mixing Jewish traditions with witchcraft, those are signals like what happens if this becomes mainstream? What happens when these young people choose this? So what we're seeing from young people is that they're post-denominational. They're like, I don't care whether you're Lutheran or Presbyterian or Episcopal or Catholic, that's irrelevant to me. They see so much of life as non-binary, and I know that that's mainly used for sexuality right now. But in so many other parts of their life, they don't see it as black and white. They say there's a whole spectrum, and we're sick of you people always trying to put us in one box that meets your demands where you want me. And they get angry about this. And so they say, I choose not to be a part of that. So what you're likely to see are small groups of people, but we're still spiritual people. So where are they going to meet it? It will be with their friends. It'll be in small groups. It'll be people that gather together to have conversations about deep things. So where's an opportunity for the church in that? It's like, can we provide them with tools to do this in a way that feels legitimate? Like some handrails to say like, okay, we have some ancient traditions that you can take with you. Use some of these. I know that you love yoga. I saw an ad the other day on my Instagram feed that said, yoga with no religion, yoga with no spirituality. I was like, wow, they're really just going to it because they see yoga as being spiritual, right? So they're trying to separate their spirituality from it. So what we need to do is invite them and to be known, to be flexible. The church of the future is an anywhere, anytime, anywhere church. So if we're only open on Sunday mornings, we're going to be missing out.
Yeah.
We are done for. That is the nail on the coffin. Once I was looking at my church this past weekend, and I added 10, 15 years, and I'm like, wow. And there were about 250 people in my church, which makes us one of the larger Episcopal churches. And I looked at it and I said, if you had 10, 15 years here, there's probably 10 people left here who haven't gone to meet Jesus personally. So we're these generations, but we also know that they're open to our message. We know that they care about social justice a lot. We know that that matters to them. All the things that the prophets say in scripture, they're like, tell me about that, but don't tell me about your hypocrisy. They really, really do not like prosperity gospel. They think it is one of the most hypocritical things that has ever, because yay, we need to support the poor, but Jesus wants me to go on a faster airplane. And they're like, that's just, I don't weigh those two together. I don't know how you do. And so they walk away. And they don't just say the Episcopal Church is wrong. They say all of Christianity is wrong, right? Because they're post-denominational in a lot of ways. So the way that we can reach them, though, is through smaller micro churches where they can be known and know others, form true relationships that are not passing judgment on them. And it's possible for us to do that. Anyway, so micro churches are one of the things for the future, the same way that mega churches are part of the future for us. The third one that I wanted to talk about is this fusion that we have is going to be emerging of religious practices and cynicism. What that means is that we are actually, instead of like pluralism, which is when different denominations come together and we're like, oh, but it's okay that you're Presbyterian and I'm Episcopal and you're Lutheran and we can all hang out Methodist, we can all hang out together. What they're going to look at is, how do we become just one without the labels? So what do we take from yours that matters? What do we take from yours that matters? What are the important things to just be a group that's post-denominational? And they're going to take practices from different things. And so for us as a church, it's an invitation to be ecclesiastically flexible. I just love saying ecclesiastically flexible. And I'm glad I don't have to say it in Spanish because I don't know how to say flexibilidad eclesiástica.
Algo que los bautistas no pueden entender.
What was that?
Something that the Baptists kind of understand.
There you go. Exactly. What do you mean? What? So the reason why this is coming is because we're also going to see greater cultural integration as when we have later generation Latinos being born and raised in this country, right? The growth of the Latino population is no longer from immigration. What that means is that those who are growing up here, we've been working on this actually, Anthony's office and Samuel and I, we've been working on the fact that 72% of Latinos either receive their information, prefer their information in English or are monolingual in English. So if you've ever been listening to Latino radio and you hear a commercial for Ford in English and you're like, why is Ford doing a commercial in English on Spanish radio? Could they not afford an announcer? Are they that cheap? No, they looked at the numbers and they know that people prefer to receive their information in English. Right? So that matters to them. So that cultural integration is going to continue to happen. What this also will mean is that collaboration will be that much more important. So meetings like this matter because as this future where things begin to fuse more, we need to be ready to say what matters to you, to what really is at the core that matters to us, so we can pass it along, the inherited church, but also be ready for new expressions that are coming out from the younger generations. This also will bring to us, though, some challenges, because they're going to demand from us what we would consider controversial theological shifts. They're going to demand from us things that we're like, oh, but we thought that was a core tenet. And the invitation for us might be, where is the Holy Spirit in this? Where is God calling us to this? I'm not saying that we throw anything out. I'm not saying that any belief is not worthy to be considered. I'm just saying that they're going to ask. And if the future, now mind you, and there's always the majority in the middle, right? You're always going to have outliers, right? So will you always be able to find Latinos, young Latinos who are ultra conservative? Yes. So if that's your niche, that's still going to be there. I'm not telling you that that's not going to be there. But what I'm saying is that the others are going to demand that we're like, we need to stand up for social causes. I don't want to be a part of a church that sits there and thinks just because we sent a check, that makes us, our culpability is gone. When we know that there's migrants sitting at the border who have no food, right? Those things matter to them. And they're going to ask us to stand up for those things, even if it means putting our 501c3 at risk, to say, fine, but we're following Jesus because that's what the younger generations are going to ask of us within the near future. The next one that I want to talk about is we're actually going to grow a little bit more because we already have a lot in it. But you know how just a moment ago I talked about the anytime, anywhere church? You will have people who want to experience their faith at 2 a.m. through a podcast. And if we're not ready to serve that to them, then we're going to lose them. Yeah. So the question for us becomes, how do we become the anytime, anywhere church? So we need to expand. So I easily can see a greater expansion. We've already seen a couple, particularly in Anglo non-denominational evangelical circles of Church That Life is one of them, right? That's digital only churches. And they participate to digital only churches. This will also, and I think you'll be happy to hear this one, is because as these younger generations of Latinos come in, there will be a greater focus on mental health. Because they are growing up in a country that is showing them that this stigma that Latinos have associated with mental health is not something to be afraid of, right? That mental health is no different than saying, I want to go to the gym, right? Or to go to the doctor. And there will certainly be, because it is very much cultural, there will be continual emphasis on family and youth ministry, but just in a digital way for people to be able to experience that as they do it in their own way. This next one, there will be a surge in an identity for Latinos as Christians. So rather than, if we look back at the 80s and the United States and the evangelical movement with the moral majority, we're going to see that because Latinos are so different in so many other ways, we're going to see what unifies us. And one of the easiest things, if I'm from Mexico and, well, you're from Mexico, but you're not from Mexico, right? And she's from Puerto Rico. Okay, we're all from different places. We don't obviously like the same soccer team. Maybe we do. Whatever it might be. What is the one thing that can unify us? Christianity, Christ. So to that, I could see in the not too distant future, the emergence of a Latino Christian political movement, much like the moral majority Or even going a little bit further, I could see the formation of like a Christian party. Where Latinos are like, neither one of the parties really represent us anymore. And so we're going away from that and we're going to form our own coalition party of Latinos that represent the Latinos, because you know why? We can't depend on these white people in Washington to continue to just ignore us. Right? So we're going to elect our own parties and it's going to become, so I could see the emergence of a Latino political movement. We're going to see radical social change and activism, particularly as young people. Cesar Chavez was ahead of his time. There are many like him ready to pick up that mantle. And I think that we will see it when the younger generations of Latinos realize what their parents went through and really take stock of that. The speed at which they will demand change will be vastly different than what we've seen before. And environmental stewardship.
Yeah.
The Latinos are going to come together in this country and say, wait a moment, especially by the time we get to 2045, when we become the largest minority in this country of what will be a country of minorities, right? We're going to demand that the earth be taken care of as well. Now, these are all, as I painted them here, I've been telling you what these represent as opportunities for the church as well. But there's also some threats that these represent for us, and particularly because the church, well, here are the three big enemies of our future as the church. Our comfort zone. This isn't, by the way, just the Latino church, in case you're wondering. Our comfort zone that this is what we know. This is where we're comfortable. Why do I have to go change? Why do I have to be? And generally what drives us to our comfort zone is that fear that Samuel was speaking about, right? When we're afraid and we revert back to our comfort zone. So we need to figure out ways of encouraging one another and encouraging the church to move past it, to take those risks for faith. The second thing that is a problem for us is indefensión aprendida. We have learned that we don't have the power. We have learned that we don't know how to do things. I can't change, they tell us, because I'm a baby boomer. Yes, you can. You have for decades changed. We all can change, but we have learned, particularly in the church, the members of the church, I'm talking particularly here about laity, has learned that I don't know how to do that, because they've always depended on pastor knows best and the professional clergy. They're the ones who guide us in this. And so they have learned that I don't know how to do that. And we need to change that paradigm so that to empower them to do that. By the way, 80%, going back to a second here, I forgot I had this data here. 80% when it comes to the comfort zone, 80% of people will find reasons not to change, even if the change can be beneficial. Someone who has had a heart attack will go to the doctor. They will tell them you need to become more healthy. You need to lower your cholesterol level. You would imagine that after a heart attack, right, the urgency that Dr. Cotter with Cotter's theory of change, what he says, urgency is the first thing you need. You would think that a heart attack is a pretty big urgency. And yet people, even though it's beneficial to change their own diet, will not do that, right? It is so easy just to go back into what we know as our comfort zone. Second of all, then, of course, the fact that we think we don't know. I don't know how to do this. And then we ourselves make ourselves weaker by saying that. And finally, is that we always find the path of least resistance. Every time I make presentations, what people are actually looking for is a silver bullet. They're like, just tell me how to get people back into my church. Just tell me how we make this happen. And they want an easy answer to this. That doesn't exist. It requires hard work. Jesus didn't say, oh, come and follow me. It's going to be amazingly easy for you. What was it that Jesus said? Come and follow me and pick up your cross, right? And think about the apostles who were left behind after he was crucified. Other than John, every single one of them, are we going to call them all failures because they all got, they were all martyred for the cause? It wasn't easy going, right? We can't always the easiest thing for them to do would have been to stay in that upper room. It's like, okay, we just stay here and we'll just be quiet. And outside of this room, we don't know Jesus. Right? But they found we got to go out and do this work. So we're called to do this work. But I do bring you, even with these things ahead of us, sí se puede. Yes, we can. And here's the key that I want you to take away from all this, other than you've learned how to be futurists. It requires intencionalidad. It requires intentional work. This isn't going to happen by itself. We can't, if you leave here and go back to your churches, to your denominations, to your place where you have influence, and just lead your life the same way you did the moment that you walked in here, then nothing will change. The same things will. Has it ever happened to you that you go to a conference and you take copious notes like, oh my God, this is amazing. This will change how I program my day. I'm going to be so productive. They're not even going to know what to do with me. Oh my God. And you find those notes 6 months later.
What was
Stuck in
the
something in your desk, in a drawer. It's like, oh my God, I think it was going to change everything. I totally forgot. Right? We need to be intentional saying we are going to change because the church is going to change. That whether or not any of these five predictions are right or wrong is not so much as the clarity that these things are happening. The early movements are already there. We can already see them. But the clarity that change will happen. And then it's just up to us to figure out how do we do this. And I just want to finish with this is, of course, who I am. And that's my title. And more than anything than my getting older picture. I wanted you to see my email. Because I set aside time in my schedule each and every week to talk to people who are trying things differently. I literally run a laboratory for experimentation in the church. So we come in, so if you have an idea, I make you this promise. If you have an idea that you've ever done in ministry where you looked out and you said, what if we had done this differently? What if we did this way? What if we did this, that? What if I have a good idea? Call me. If it's a good idea, we both agree that it could be a good idea, we will fund it and let's go try it. We'll come up with the minimum viable prototype and we will go try it. I love ideas. Or even if you just have an idea, you're like, ooh, is this the craziest idea ever? Just call me and I'll remind you that it probably is, but we should do it anyways. Because crazy ideas think about it. We literally follow a guy that was crucified for teaching love, and we go out into the world to further teach that love, even though the world's telling us, but I want to hate people. And we're like, no, but we need to love people. So we are crazy Christians who are called to forgive. How many times? Is it 7 times, Lord? No. 70 times 7. So we're already crazy. Might as well just live into it. Thank you all very much. Now let's do the questions. All the questions you have. Yes.
So can you give us 2 examples of something really like some idea that you had and that you tried something and what's been the result of that?
Sure. So I'll tell you one in Latino ministry, going to the 72% of Latinos that prefer their information in English or are monolingual in English. In St. Louis, of all places, with a small congregation, we started what we call La Misa in English. And so it is culturally Latino. So we have La Guitarra and we have La Virgen de Guadalupe. They're like, who's she? Virgen de Guadalupe. So we had to train them on some of these things, the importance of these things, right? So, but they started to do once a month a service, and it was on a weeknight. It wasn't just like on a Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, right? And their first service, when they tried it, they had 47 people that they had not seen in their church before, who were of Latino origin in their family, that just wanted to come and experience something different. It's like, we were away from the church. We figure once a month's not so bad. We can do that. By the way, the new norm for people to go to the church is every 4 to 6 weeks. It's if you get new people to join you at church, it's unlikely that you will see them each and every week. So that's one of the ones that we tried that definitely worked. Another thing that we did, we know from research that if people are engaged with scripture 4 or 5 times a week, I'm sorry, 3 or 4 times a week, 3 or 4 times a week. Their lives are vastly different. They drink less. They're more likely to be charitable. They get divorced less. They are more likely to vote more often, be civically minded, all of these things. And they're also more likely to go to church on Sunday. So we created a skill on Alexa that if you go to and say, hey, Alexa, open Episcopal prayer, Alexa, in her nice little computer voice, will say, the Lord be with you. And if you're Episcopalian or one of ours, you might say like, and also with you. And then she'll say, let us pray. You're like, wow, okay. And then she plays for you a recording of morning prayer or evening prayer based on the time of day. And on a regular basis, 500 people are praying the daily office with Alexa. So we lowered the barrier for people to engage with scripture. So it can be part of your morning routine. When you say, good morning, Alexa, she'll respond, it is 77 degrees. The weather's going to be this. And then she'll say, the Lord be with you, and just continue to play it with you. So we did that, and it's worked very well for us, just as a way of showing that technology doesn't need to be scary as we do it.
There is I use a Alexa app that is
Skill.
called a skill. Yeah, that is called Saint of the Day. And so in the morning I ask, and
She tells
Alexa
you.
tells me who's
There
the
you
saint
go.
of the day. Give me the story of the saint.
Other questions about what I just shared with you all? Yes.
I love the 5 scenarios that you gave us for the Latino churches in the US. And I think in some ways I see the future now. It's like, oh yeah, I go to a micro church, and I know tons of like mega churches in Latino church. And I see, the presence of digital ministry and that. The last one though, with the unified Latino identity, I'm curious like how you'll reach that. It's been my experience, especially particularly with younger people, that there is a lot of like pushback against this for many reasons. I think one is realizing like we are a diverse group of different stories. We cannot like, yes, we experience colonization, but the way that you experience it and the way that I experience it, what about Afro Latinos? Like, and are we counted? I mean, there's a huge movement right now with the census, right? And they're going to make Latino a race category. And there's a huge movement in the young people saying, we're not a race. Like, I mean, we have indigenous people and we have Black people. And we have, so I'm curious how you reach that and how you're seeing, because the circles that I navigate, particularly younger circles, everyone's like, Latino is a colonial term. It's a term like there's a lot of like, we don't want that either because that we're not the same. Like we'd rather be Mexican or Chicano or Puerto Rican or, and we play with that, we say like, how do we play with similar stories of colonization, and maybe share some pain in that, but and I think it's there, like obviously, like I mean, we see it, we look around the temple, it's like, okay, but all of us that are here, we're somehow Latina, right? And so we're there, but and so curious how you reach that and where you have some more data of that, because a lot, and I agree with like all the like activism, all the radical changes that happen in that. Because I think part of that activism, part of that radical space is also naming like, no, I am an indigenous person. I am an Afro-Latina from XYZ. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So to be clear, it was not a demographic.
Sure, yeah.
So what I pointed out is a unifying Latino Christian identity, because as the post-denominational sort of world begins to catch up with us more as these younger generations come of age, what's going to matter less is whether you're Presbyterian or Catholic or whatever you might be. What's going to matter more is that you're Christian. So that differentiation. So this isn't where I mentioned that what we would see is that they will become, let me retrace that. This isn't like a census checkoff, right?
Of course, yeah, you said an identity.
Yeah, it's identity but that identity can be harnessed for political power. That identity can be harnessed for the social change that's brought about precisely because of the things that you just mentioned, which is that we all have different experiences. And we all grew up differently. We all come from perhaps from different places. We all may even come from different governmental backgrounds, right? How we see government and what that means to us. But what we're seeing now, and this is starting to form, is in Arizona, And I can get you the article. I'm sure I have it somewhere still, but in Arizona, or it was either Arizona or New Mexico. That the political parties started reaching the Latinos, not through their country of origin, not through vengan Mexicanos or vengan de acá, but through their Christianity. That was the unifying force that brought them
In the
together.
valley,
So,
it happens in the valley, Texas Valley.
Yeah.
okay.
More about that than it is about.
And so what you'll see is as that continues to grow, because they're already reaching posts, right?
Christian identities.
So what brings them together is that the fact that you're all Christian, because they feel, this being in this particular case, it was the Republican Party. They're like, we can turn a whole bunch of them to vote for us.
And women.
And exactly.
Women.
So they think the values are the same, so we can get them through that way. So they're reaching through Christian. What I'm thinking will happen is at some point, we Latinos will realize, wait a second, instead of being picked by this identity and use, what happens if using this identity, the things that matter to us, we stand up for some of those things on our own? Does that make more sense?
We're hearing that more
Oh,
and
it
more,
makes sense.
more and more.
Okay,
Thanks for the clarification.
yeah, no problem.
Christian versus the Muslim.
Just to piggyback on that, so is this identity as Christian, so I guess I'm having this, you know what it is, because I'm struggling with the word now. I'm struggling with how we use the word now, Christian. And I think a lot of younger generations are also struggling with that. They like Jesus. But the whole, I mean, it just feels like it's loaded, and it's actually in this country, it's a political term, right? It's very politically charged. So I'm wondering if the number two, right, one of the things that you talked about was the shift theologically, right? Some of our tenets, is this generation, can it help us? I'll take to Lord, please, deconstruct what we have hacked on.
They're gonna demand it. They're gonna demand, what do we mean? What does it mean? We talk a lot about discipling people. And
Yeah,
they're gonna, what does that mean? Break it down for me
yeah,
into
yeah.
very practical terms, what you're asking of me. And in which way might this oppress other people by doing this? They're gonna be much more aware of how my drinking this water in this bottle in this place might in another place be hurting someone.
Yeah.
And that's gonna matter to them. So yeah, deconstruction is big for these younger generations. They deconstruct lunch and they're gonna deconstruct the faith.
I know, I have.
And I think also there's a lot of reclaiming of language.
Yep.
And sometimes even language that was used. Yeah, derogatorily, a lot of times. I say the younger generations are reclaiming it and we're putting the justification
Yep.
to them.
Well, and by the way, when I was talking about ecclesiastical flexibility, one of the things that goes into that, for example, is when they start bringing in from their ancestral lands, like what do we think about Aztec drums? What do we think about this, that, or the other, right? Can we bring in some of these things that matter to my people before they had to flee or before they were brought? So those things are going to matter too. I could see that would come up as well. Yes.
Yeah, have you read the book, The Fourth Turning?
The fourth turning?
Yeah,
No.
William Strauss and Neil Howe. They mention, so they're sociologists. And they mention, it's even being used in investing circles, right? They mentioned that the United States typically goes historically through what they call a fourth turning in the fourth generation. And their argument is this: the following generation learns not based on the good things that the previous generation did, but on their mistakes, right? And so what you're seeing right now is more socially conscious generation, because our previous generations were not conscious about that or conscious about how they worked in the environment and everything. So a lot of what you're saying actually fits into their model.
and they never missed, let's say, time-wise, they say that between 2020 and 2035, there is gonna be a huge shift in American society and political movements and everything, just because the older generation that established the institutionality are dying. And so when you see deconstruction and all that, what they're saying is, this is not something new for American society.
Interesting.
It is a deadening, if you can say, or a deconstruction of a previous institution. But I have the idea, or this is something that I've thought about, that my 10-year-old and my 7-year-old are looking at all the deconstruction that is happening. And when they grow up, they're gonna say, we need to build something, a new institution. Another structure, because we grew up without a structure and our parents were not mature enough to give us that structure. And so they're gonna call on me now for the thing that I'm saying right now, and probably, which is something that they also mentioned, the grandparents have more sometimes in common with the granddaughter, with the grandsons that they have with the parents. Because what are you getting? Because my grandparents fought against the institutionality of my. So what I'm looking at, what I was gonna ask you is if you've ever heard of this book, if you've ever read it, because I know that, to be honest, even in this is gonna sound bad, but don't judge the book and the authors who are intellectually, I mean, they're professors. Because of a person that is using it for other gains. This is the book that Steve Bannon even uses to carve out his whole ideology and long-term strategy politically. But it's also used in investing, it's also used in different areas. And so
I'll certainly look it up. No, I hadn't heard of it. I'll certainly look it up. It sounds very fascinating. But yeah, I could see that, and we're starting to see it. And I'm not a sociologist, right?
Okay.
And for the record, I try to look ahead as to what things are scenarios based on what's happening already that we're already seeing. If it goes more mainstream.
So quick comment and then a question. One, fantastic job. This is very exciting for someone who very much loves the church, but probably doesn't have an ounce of life for it currently, which is why I do the work that I do. This is empowering to hear that there is change coming. I love that. I mean, most of you weren't there yesterday, but the stuff that we're doing at the Colossian Forum, like we have topical curricula, but the topic doesn't matter. We're like, how do we hold these things that feel like they're in tension when newness comes? Like, how do we be good change managers? And that's what we teach. The topic's just the thing that attracts people to the work, but that's what we're doing. But this is really interesting to me, and especially with where the church is going. I've been very attracted to the microchurch movement. The microchurch pastors that I have talked to that are in the process of doing some of that work, they have all said to me, if I do this work well, I won't have a job.
Right.
So what do you foresee? Like, can denominations come around that and help? Like, what does it look like to fund that or support that structure?
Each denomination is obviously going to have to, because when I talk to our bishops in the Episcopal Church and I talk to them about the microchurch movement, invariably their first question, but how do we control them? How do they not go? And they mean, how do they not go rogue, right? How do they not start teaching like bad theology or something? But we know them as bishops, like, how do I control them? You know, absolutely. I don't, and this is from, I am, right? I'm a trained, ordained priest, a professional class that's saying in the future, my job is likely to be a bivocational job as we lead people through these things. There will always be large churches and even micro churches, by the way. I think that I've been one of the projects can I mention one project that I'm super excited about?
Yes.
We at Tritank, and we're working with our ecumenical partners in the Methodist Church, in the Lutheran Church, and in the Presbyterian Church. Okay, you see, I know, we're right there. We have a project called the Phoenix Project. So we are studying deep dive of young people. Not like we're looking 21 to 29 is the age group that we're looking at. We want to figure out, where are you getting your spirituality? Where are you doing all this? All of these things. We're doing ethnographic studies. We bought syndicated research.
We
We
know, we're getting to know them. So
what
we're doing tons and
tons
of
and tons of
interviews.
interviews.
And all four denominations are gathering in New York City
On in June, where we're gonna do a design sprint following the model of Google and how they do a 5-day design sprint. We're gonna look at all this data and we're gonna say, knowing this about them, how would we build a community? And we're not even calling it a church because that we're still testing whether or not that word has already been wounded too much.
Yeah.
So how do we teach them? We've already learned a couple of things. Like, by the way, they're not afraid of the word Jesus. They're not turned off by Jesus. They're not turned off by monks and nuns. They're like, they're walking the walk. I believe that, right? So we're learning more and more as we're getting closer to June. But our goal is that in those 5 days, we're going to build something, a prototype that we can then go out and plant. And we can literally go out and be like, let's try it. Let's figure out if this actually attracts these young people and fills them with the Holy Spirit as we want them to be filled. Now, hold on a second. One of the things that we have decided in based on the early conversation of this is that they also yearn. So here's a little tidbit. Are you all familiar with Burning Man?
Yeah.
It's a thing out in the desert and they gather for a week and then they burn a man. They're made out of straw, not an actual man.
They're cannibals. They're awful.
No,
Why are they arrested?
no. So they go out there, they do that, then they. Turns out that 70% of the people who go to Burning Man each year are returning each year. And why? Because they expect something transformational to happen during that week. They know that something amazing will happen. That's what we need to add to the micro churches. Micro churches will need to come together to realize that they're part of something bigger, at least once or twice a year. It could be a 1-day event or a 2-day event. And as the way that history repeats itself, we might even call it a revival, right? It could be where they come together to experience something transformational beyond just a small group. So that, I think, so we will always have the large churches, but what I've discovered, at least in the Episcopal Church, is that bishops don't want to be the one under whom churches get closed. Bishops don't want to be the ones who are saying, we have to do things differently. They're when the churches are even down now 30%. So they're so focused on those things that there are days when I bang my head against the wall.
Just say, I am so ready for, Lord, just take it all away.
Take it all away.
Burn it down.
Burn it down. I'm ready for the
Burn it
resurrection.
down.
Burn it down.
We'll start again
We'll
tomorrow.
start again tomorrow.
But these
But these
mountaintop experiences, which is what how we term them, right? Summer camp.
These can be totally transformational. If I didn't have enough kids in my church, if I were a parish minister and I didn't have enough kids, I would figure out a way of doing once a year a camp. Because we know, we have all the evidence in the world that the mountaintop experience provided by a camp can shift their entire trajectory of their Christianity.
It's a success of passport that we have been doing together. Yeah, with the Episcopal Church.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well done.
It is.
Well, us. Woo-woo. So I hope that answers Bishop. We're also waiting for a few of the baby boomers who are in power to sort of move along. You know, it's hard to try to bring about change when they don't necessarily want to see it that way.
So then how would you see it being like, what would it look like for people who have roles? Maybe they're just not, maybe they're not being funded by a denomination or church to do so. But if the microchurch is reproducing itself, and it's doing it well, it should not be necessarily dependent on a single pastor. Then how would we, like, who's leading that? Do we pay them? Is that just the way the Episcopal Church grows from here on out in these microchurch movements?
But I would,
The way that I could actually, let's see what you have to say on that.
well, I just wonder if whether the model is not necessarily a bunch of pastors, but a bunch of lay ministers.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have the nucleus, you have a local church, this is our model, you have a local church, that creates a place of support, creates a place of training. And then these lay missioners are going out, creating these communities of faith What I'm interested is creating community of faith that are specifically about that, including the public theology, you know.
Specifically about raising up other leaders?
No,
Oh.
specifically about the creating communities of faith that reflect this new future,
Ah,
right?
yeah, where it's not a small group, because a lot of times I talk to people
Right,
about my
it's
church,
not-
they're like, dinner church, right? Yeah, that's just a small group. Like, guys, like, no. For the people who experience it, that will be church.
Right.
They won't be somewhere on Sunday morning. That's how they experience
And so the
church.
pastor is the pastor of the local church, but that lay missioner is their connection.
And pastors will serve a role sort of as a chaplain.
Yeah.
So you might belong to group number 37, which hopefully will have a better name than 37. But if you feel you need, pastoral care, like someone close to you died or whatever it might be, there will be a professional cleric nearby to help you with that. I believe that there will always be a need for a professional cleric class.
And it's very interesting because movement like that have been growing in Latin America, like in El Salvador for years. And the first group,
Where there haven't been enough priests. Comunidades de base.
Yeah.
Part of where we look for innovation, and which is, by the way, why, so what we're seeing is as they brought those stories with them to the US, and the church in the US says, this is how church is, they're like, is it?
Yeah.
I think church should be different, and now they're starting to gain more power within denominations, who will say, well, let's do something different. So that's also where we're getting some of that, the fact that they're starting to do some of those, is because they brought it with them. It was part of their story. And there will always be, I think, cathedrals, there will always be big churches, because there are spaces. I mean, think about it, every time there's a national tragedy,
Yeah.
we seek to go to quote unquote holy ground. A place that's been set aside as a place to go and just hold those candles there together as a community, even if we're totally vastly different. But for this moment, we all need to just be here, right?
And for the weddings too.
And for weddings, although nowadays,
And funeral.
yeah, now they're everywhere. Destination weddings. I'm still waiting for the couple to come to me and be like, hey,